The night shift in the west wing of St. Augustine's was a quiet sort of chaos. Monitors beeped in soft rhythms, the hallway lights stayed dimmed like the ward was always on the cusp of sleep, and somewhere down the corridor a vending machine hummed a broken lullaby. To most, it was the loneliest stretch of hours in a hospital, but to Clara Morno it was sanctuary. She liked the hush of it, the way people spoke in murmurs, the stillness between the moments when pain ebbed and sleep took hold. The night shift made space for gentleness, for listening, and if she was honest, for hiding. Clara had transferred to St. Augustine's 2 months ago, after her mother passed and her younger brother moved in with their aunt in Oregon. With no ties left to the coast where she'd grown up, she packed what she could fit into her sedan and drove inland until the mountains softened into plains and the sky stretched so wide it made her ache. She hadn't planned on staying in this small town, but St. Augustine's had a night nurse opening, and the minute she walked into the break room that smelled like stale coffee and lavender hand sanitizer, she'd felt something she hadn't in a long time. Stillness. That night, as the new nurse on shift, she was assigned to room 312. Patient James Cartwright, age 38, status recovery post-op cardiac. He'd come in 2 days ago after collapsing at a charity gala. The nurses said he was some big-shot architect from the city, widowed, no children, something about his heart giving out without warning, like a floor dropping out beneath his feet. Clara didn't expect much when she walked into his room the first time, just another patient, another chart, another dose of something to keep the pain manageable. But James Cartwright was different. He was tall even lying down, broad in the shoulders, hair silver at the temples but not from age, it looked deliberate somehow. There was a crease between his brows that hadn't smoothed even in sleep, like something in him refused to rest. His hands were calloused, not the kind you'd expect from someone who worked at a desk. No, these were Builder's hands, hands that had held weight. She adjusted his IV, checked his vitals, and made her notes. As she turned to leave, his voice cracked through the quiet. "Stay a while." Clara turned back surprised. His eyes were still closed. Maybe he was dreaming, but his hand twitched beneath the sheet as if reaching. She hesitated, then returned to the chair by the window. She stayed until his breathing deepened again, until the lines on his face softened. She didn't speak. Neither did he. That became a pattern. For several nights in a row, room 312 called to her more than the others, not because James asked, he rarely did, but because in the hush of his sleep he seemed more alive than most of the conscious patients. Some nights he murmured things, snatches of a life half forgotten. He spoke of rain on glass, of someone named Elise, of foundations and flight paths. She tried not to listen too hard. It felt like opening someone else's diary. But then on the seventh night he said her name. Not Elise. Clara. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. She froze by the edge of the bed, blood pulsing loud in her ears. He didn't stir after that, just turned his head toward her as if seeking warmth. She didn't move for a long while. It had to be a coincidence. There were other Claras in the world, and besides, he was barely lucid. But she carried the sound of it with her like a pebble in her shoe. When she clocked out at dawn, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she sat in her car with the heater running and stared at her hands. She wasn't used to being seen, not since her mother got sick, not since she started working nights so no one would ask her how she was holding up. James Cartwright was just another patient. Except he was. And the way he'd said her name, like a question, like a memory, made something fragile in her begin to stir. She told herself not to read into it, not to hope. But hope, like a heart, has its own quiet rhythm. It beats even when we're not listening. And that night it was louder than ever. The next night, Clara arrived 10 minutes early. She told herself it was because of the weather. A storm was rolling in, the kind that dragged thunder like luggage across the sky. But she parked closer to the entrance than usual, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the steering wheel. Inside, the air smelled like rain and rubbing alcohol, and the night felt heavy with something unsaid. She changed into her scrubs in silence, her locker door creaking like it might confess something. When she checked the board, room 312 was still under her care. She tried not to feel relief. James was awake when she entered this time. The light above his bed was dimmed to a soft amber, painting everything in golds and shadows. He looked up from where he'd been staring at the ceiling. His eyes were lighter than she remembered, gray but not cold, like weathered stone warmed by the sun. "You're the one who stays," he said. Clara blinked only when you need me. His smile was slow, reluctant. "I think I do." She checked his vitals to give her hand something to do, but her pulse betrayed her, skipping like a flat stone on water. "How are you feeling tonight?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Like someone poured cement into my chest and then forgot to smooth it out. She smiled despite herself, so slightly better than last night. Maybe he watched her with an intensity that made her throat tighten. I remember dreaming, I don't usually, but I heard someone say my name, and I knew it was different this time. She didn't answer right away, didn't know how. Instead, she adjusted the blanket at his feet and kept her eyes on the floor. "Did I say anything?" he asked. Her fingers paused on the edge of the sheet. "You said a name," she said carefully. He waited, patient. "My name." James looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then I wasn't dreaming. He didn't elaborate and she didn't ask. But something shifted between them, an awareness, a flicker of recognition that felt both new and impossibly old. The next few nights fell into rhythm. James didn't sleep as much now, they talked more. About little things at first, favorite colors, the unfair price of hospital coffee, how neither of them liked silence unless it was earned. He told her about architecture like it was poetry, about the way light moves through space, how buildings could hold stories in their bones. She told him about her childhood in a coastal town where the fog rolled in like it belonged to the sea, about caring for her mother during the last months, how it had changed the shape of her heart. She didn't say much about the grief, but he understood anyway. There was a silence in him too, one that stretched beyond the hospital walls. One night, when the rain was coming down hard against the windows and most of the ward was asleep, Clara brought in a small radio and placed it on the windowsill. Soft jazz floated through the room like a secret. James closed his eyes and smiled. "Now I feel like I'm in a film noir." She pulled the chair closer to his bed. "You'd be the mysterious man with a past." He cracked one eye open. "And you?" Clara shrugged, "Just the night nurse." James turned his head to look at her directly. "You're not just anything." It was the way he said it, quiet, without insistence, that made the words feel like a hand on her chest. They didn't speak for a while after that, just sat there in the glow of soft light and music. The storm outside softened into a whisper, as if the world was listening in. On the fifth night, he asked her something unexpected. "Will you take me outside?" Clara raised an eyebrow, in a wheelchair. "In a storm. It's midnight." "I know, but I haven't felt rain in over a year." She hesitated, but he looked at her like the idea wasn't madness but memory, something vital. So she checked his vitals again, just to be sure, then wheeled him down the empty hallway past the nurse's station, past the flickering soda machine, to the sliding doors that led to the courtyard. The rain had lessened to a mist, the kind that clung to skin like breath. Clara stepped out first, letting it kiss her arms, then turned to James, who tilted his face upward as if relearning something he'd forgotten. "He didn't speak, neither did she." When they finally went back inside, his hospital gown damp and his hair darker with water, he looked younger. Not by years, but by weight, like something invisible had been left out there in the mist. Clara dried his hair gently with a towel, her fingers brushing his scalp. She felt his breath catch and tried not to notice her own matching it. He looked up at her with a strange mix of tenderness and fear. "You know this can't be nothing." "I know," she said. But she didn't move away. The next night he was quieter, not distant but contemplative. Clara felt it too, a shift in the current. She'd known something was building, had felt it in every glance, every shared silence, but she didn't know what came next. Around 3 in the morning, while the rest of the ward slept and the halls stretched like held breath, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. James said nothing at first, just held it like it meant something, like it could steady them both. Then in a voice barely louder than the beep of his monitor, he said, "When I woke up in that ambulance, all I could think about was how I'd wasted time. Years of it, on things that don't hold you at night, on silence." Clara turned her hand so their fingers fit between each other's. "I'm tired of silence too," she whispered. That night when he drifted into sleep, he didn't murmur a single word. But he didn't let go of her hand. And Clara, sitting by his side with her heart wide open, realized she didn't want to be anywhere else. Clara didn't notice how much the nights had changed until she tried walking past room 312 without going in. It was a small experiment, just a moment at the start of her shift, a test of how much she had let herself get wrapped into the quiet gravity of one man's orbit. But when she passed the door, even with her hands full of medication trays, her steps slowed. She didn't make it past the second room before she turned back. Inside, James was reading. A real book, not a hospital brochure or donated magazine, but something dog-eared and full of weight. His reading glasses rested low on the bridge of his nose. He looked up when she entered and gave that slow, unguarded smile that she'd come to associate with warmth. "I wondered how long you'd hold out," he said. Clara set her trays on the rolling cart. "3 doors, that's all the willpower I've got." He laughed, soft and genuine. "Better than me. I only last 2 minutes after you leave before I start wondering when you'll come back." That startled her, not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it, without defense, without apology. James had stopped pretending this was temporary, and maybe she had too. The shift passed quietly but not uneventfully. One patient coded down the hall, and Clara was there with the team, hands steady, voice calm. When it was over and the quiet had returned, she leaned against the wall outside room 312 and closed her eyes for a moment longer than necessary. Inside, James waited. He'd seen the exhaustion behind her eyes lately. Not just the kind born of long nights, but the kind that comes from carrying too much too quietly. "Come here," he said when she returned, patting the edge of his bed. "Hospital policy says." "Screw hospital policy," he murmured, eyes dancing. She hesitated, then sat. The mattress dipped under her weight, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The radio on the windowsill played something low and slow, something with a cello. "I used to think falling in love was this grand, cinematic thing," he said after a pause. Clara turned her head toward him, "And now? I think it's this, the way you show up every night. The way you remember how I take my tea, and that I hate the word resilient, because people only use it when they don't want to talk about grief." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not supposed to fall for my patient." He reached for her fingers. "Then don't fall, just stay." They sat like that until morning. No declarations, no promises, just the truth between them, bare and breathing. Days passed. James grew stronger. Physical therapy was added to his routine. More tests, fewer wires. He joked that soon they'd kick him out for being too healthy. Clara tried not to think about what that would mean. The night before his discharge, he asked her to walk with him outside again. This time no chair, just slow, steady steps through the courtyard where tulips had begun to push through the soil like quiet defiance. "You said something once," Clara said as they walked beneath the dim glow of outdoor lamps, "about wasting time." "I've wasted most of mine," he said gently. "You haven't wasted this." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I don't want this to end with a room number and a goodbye." Her heart thudded in response. "You don't even know where I live," she said, smiling despite herself. "Then tell me," he said. "Tell me where you live, tell me what you want, tell me how to keep this going." There was nothing in his voice but hope, real hope, not desperate, not clinging, just wide open and waiting. Clara reached up and touched his face. The first time she'd initiated contact, his skin was warm, real, and hers trembled only a little. "I want something slow," she said. "Something that starts with a name spoken in sleep and becomes a life we don't need to escape from." His eyes shone in the dim light. "You already feel like home." The next day, James was discharged. Clara wasn't scheduled to work that night, but she came anyway. He waited for her by the main entrance, dressed in real clothes for the first time since she'd met him. He held a small paper bag of leftover chocolates from the nurse's station and a worn copy of the book he'd been reading. She approached him slowly, unsure if the world outside their quiet ward would change anything between them. He held out the book, page 72, "That's where I started thinking about you." She took it, opened to the page. A line was underlined in pencil. "Some people don't arrive with noise or grand entrances. They come like quiet rain, and you only realize they've changed everything once the world feels green again." Clara closed the book. "You really are a romantic." James smiled. "Only for you." They walked out into the sunlight together, no longer nurse and patient, no longer bound by visiting hours or unspoken boundaries. They walked like people who had earned their way into something rare. Not a love story that started with lightning, but one that began simply with a name whispered in the dark. They didn't rush. James found a rental a few blocks from the hospital, an old carriage house converted into a cottage with ivy growing wild along the fence and a porch swing that creaked when the wind moved right. Clara came by in the evenings sometimes after her shifts, still in scrubs with her badge clipped to her hip, her hair smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion. They didn't call it dating, not at first. It was just moments strung together, quiet dinners, cups of tea on the porch, books exchanged with scribbled notes in the margins. Sometimes he cooked, slow and careful like he built everything, and she would lean against the counter watching him, wondering how she had learned to feel safe again without noticing the exact moment it happened. The first time he kissed her, they were in his kitchen. She had just laughed at something about the way he stored his coffee filters in the freezer, and when she turned around, he was there looking at her like she was the thing he'd been searching for in every blueprint he ever drafted. It was gentle, no rush, no hesitation, just a question asked with lips and answered in kind. Afterward, they didn't speak for a while. The silence between them felt like a held breath, then a sigh. "Are we okay?" she asked. James tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "We're more than okay." And they were most days. But healing isn't linear, and neither is love when it grows out of old wounds. James struggled with restlessness. He missed work, not just the job, but the act of creating, the rhythm of it, the ownership of a day. His recovery had gone well, but his doctors were cautious. The heart, they reminded him, doesn't forget trauma. It stores it in muscle and rhythm. Clara, who knew this intimately, understood better than anyone. Still, watching him pace the living room some nights, his jaw tight with frustration, made her wish she could offer more than tea and soft music. "Maybe you need to design again," she said one evening, "not for clients, for you." James looked up from the sketches scattered across his table. "What would I even build?" "Something no one else sees but you," she said. "That's how you started, isn't it?" He didn't answer, but the next day she came by to find him working on a model. Not for a skyscraper or a gallery, but for a single-story home with a wide porch and garden paths that wove like threads through the yard. It looked familiar. She bent over the plans. "Is that my grandmother's window seat?" He grinned without looking up. "You described it once, I remembered." Something inside her broke open then, not with pain but gratitude. For the first time in years, she let herself cry in front of someone without apology. James simply stood, walked to her, and pulled her into his arms. "I remember all of it, Clara. I listen when you speak like it's a map." And she believed him. Their first argument came 3 weeks later. It was small at first, an offhand comment she made about needing space and how sometimes she felt like she was being swallowed by someone else's pace. James didn't take it well. He shut down, retreating behind a wall she hadn't seen since he was a patient. "I didn't mean I want to leave," she said later, trying to explain. "I meant I need to breathe on my own too. That doesn't mean I don't want us." He nodded, jaw clenched. "You're the one thing I'm terrified of losing, Clara." "I'm not going anywhere," she said, "but I've lost myself before. I can't do that again, not even for love." That night they didn't sleep curled into each other. He slept on his side of the bed, she on hers, the space between them full of words they hadn't figured out how to say yet. But in the morning, he made her coffee just the way she liked it. She found a note beside the mug in his handwriting. "I'm learning, I want to learn you right." She folded the note into her pocket and kept it there all day. Weeks passed, summer deepened. The town came alive with open-air markets and street musicians and laughter that echoed down cobbled streets. James's strength returned and he started consulting again just a few hours a week. Clara shifted to evening shifts instead of overnights. Her life started to take shape again, but now with him in it. One Saturday they drove out to the lake. No plans, just a picnic basket, an old quilt, and a day to waste together. They swam, ate peaches with juice dripping down their arms. He traced constellations onto her shoulder while she lay across the blanket, her eyes closed, her skin humming with sunlight and contentment. "I was dead before I met you," he said quietly, his fingers still moving across her skin. "I just didn't know it." Clara opened her eyes, turned to face him. "Then I guess we brought each other back." He kissed her then, not the kind that ignites or conquers, the kind that settles, that roots, that says I know you and I'm still here. That night, as they lay beneath a sky thick with stars, she whispered something she hadn't said to anyone since her mother. "I'm not afraid anymore." He didn't ask what she meant, just held her tighter as if to say, "I've got you always." And for the first time in years, she believed someone would keep that promise. Autumn arrived quietly, tucking itself into the corners of their days. The air turned brisk and the trees lining James's street blushed red and gold. Clara started bringing soups to his place, hearty ones with lentils and rosemary, and he pretended not to notice that she stayed later each night, her keys lingering longer in the bowl by the door. They hadn't said the words again, not since the lake, but their love showed up in smaller, steadier ways. In the way he always had a blanket warmed and ready when her shift ended. in the way she left notes in the margins of his blueprints. What if this window faced morning light? This curve reminds me of you. Keep going. James found work again, not the kind that devoured his hours or brought him back to a skyline he no longer cared to conquer, but smaller projects. A children's library with arched reading nooks, a community garden pavilion that could shelter during storms. He told Clara he only wanted to build things that made space for joy now, things people didn't rush through but lingered in. She understood her own life was shifting too. She'd been offered a daytime position, something permanent with better pay and fewer hours. It terrified her, not because of the change, but because of what it meant to finally choose a life she didn't have to survive. "You should take it," James said one night as they stood on his porch, breath fogging in the cold. "You've given enough to everyone else, it's time." She looked out over the yard, where the wind had made a mosaic of fallen leaves. "I'm scared I won't know who I am in the daylight." He took her hand and placed it over his chest, just above the long-healed scar. "You're the one who stayed even when I didn't know how to ask. That's who you are. You'll still be her no matter what hour it is." She leaned into him, her forehead resting against his collarbone. The porch light buzzed above them like a lullaby. A week later, she took the job. It changed everything and nothing. Her days became filled with new rhythms, lunch breaks and sunlight actual dinners. But her nights still ended the same way, with James in a home that smelled like wood shavings and fresh basil, her shoes tucked neatly by the door next to his. One evening, as winter crept in and the world outside darkened early, James came into the kitchen carrying something wrapped in linen. "What's that?" she asked, barefoot in his sweatshirt, stirring a pot on the stove. He set it gently on the table and unwrapped it. It was a model, small, detailed, made of pale wood and love. A house. Not the one she lived in now, not the one he had rented. This was something new, designed with her curves, her quiet, her breath in mind. "It's ours," he said simply, "if you want it to be." She blinked, breath catching, her heart rising in her throat. "You built us a house," she whispered. "I built a place to keep you safe, and open, and seen, all the things you never asked for but always deserved." She walked to him slowly, took his face in her hands. "I never thought I'd find someone who saw me like this." He kissed her long and slow, the kind of kiss that promised more than passion, it promised presence. Later, over dinner, she asked, "Do you remember the first time you said my name?" He nodded. "In my sleep. And you didn't even know me yet." "I think part of me did," he said, "the part that was waiting." That night they danced in the living room with socks sliding on the wood floor and a crackling record playing a song neither of them knew. James spun her gently and she laughed, the sound unguarded and whole. She thought of her mother then, of her own quiet grief, and how somehow against all odds, love had found her not with fire but with warmth, not with grand gestures but with a name spoken into the dark. Months passed, then seasons, then years. The house was built on a hill just outside of town, with tall windows and a garden where bees hummed and where every room held light like memory. On the windowsill of their bedroom sat a small, battery-powered radio. It played low music every evening as they read side by side, fingers brushing between pages. James never forgot what it meant to be held up by someone when you couldn't carry your own weight. And Clara never forgot the way it felt to be called back to life, gently, without demand, just the sound of her name carried on breath. She was just the night nurse. Until the man in room 312 whispered her name in his sleep. And with that, everything began.